he's quoted from a Rambam that the way to express Ahavas Hashem is to be almost declared, even when it's not so geschmack. But my favorite line that he said is, even if we don't go through the Daf Yomi well, the Daf Yomi is going through us. So whatever we absorb is good. Okay. And then he gave us his oil whole shmuz how they have to learn more. Okay, so let's go back there. But before I go back there, I just want to try to remember what we learned yesterday. Yesterday we learned about a whole bunch of halachas that Shmuel said. I just want to run through them quickly and summarize them so that we know where we're holding. So on Daf Chavavim days, which was Shabbos' Daf, Shmuel said a halacha. Echad choylitz l'kulam. And the case was where there were three brothers, and we'll call them, well, actually there were five brothers, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, and Yisachar. And we'll say that Levi, Yehuda, and Yisachar were each married to three sisters. Levi, Yehuda, and Yisachar were married to three sisters, and first Levi died. After Levi died, Levi's wife fell to Yibum, to Reuben and Shimon. So Reuben did chalitza. So Reuben did chalitza. Then Yehuda's wife died. So who's going to do the chalitza? So for Reuben, this is already a chois chalutzasa. For Shimon, it's not a chois chalutzasa, but Shimon didn't make chalitza yet. So Rav said before the Shimon makes the chalitza, and if Yisachar dies and now his wife falls to Yibum, whether it's Reuben or whether it's Shimon, either way, this woman is a chois chalitza. So because of that, we have a little bit of a problem. So what Rav said was that they each have to make chalitza. Shmuel said no, echot choylet l'chulam. So we got into the subject of inferior chalitzas. An inferior chalitza is a chalitza that when the person who did the chalitza, he did not have the option of having done Yibum. He could not have done Yibum at the time. So the Gemara proves that Shmuel holds that inferior chalitzas we try to stay away from. And that was involving a different case. It was speaking where two sisters fell to Yibum to one person, and each of these two sisters had a co-wife. So there's four women who are falling to Yibum. And out of these four women, two of them are sisters. So Shmuel said, you're better off making chalitza on the tzorais and not on the achayos. Don't make chalitza on one of the two sisters, make chalitza on the other ones. So you see from here that he doesn't like compromised chalitzas because he told you to avoid making the chalitza on the achayos, make the chalitza on the tzorais, which were going to be considered perfect chalitzas. So therefore, we've proven that Shmuel holds you supposed to stay away from inferior chalitzas. So if you're supposed to stay away from inferior chalitzas, why in the world would Shmuel have said that echad choylitz l'chulam? When what's going to happen is someone is doing chalitza in a situation where it's not an ideal chalitza when they could have done a better chalitza. So the Gemara had two terutzim to explain Shmuel. One teretz was when Shmuel said echad choylitz l'chulam, he doesn't mean one makes all the chalitzas, because you're right, he doesn't want to do inferior chalitzas. Rather, he just means the third sister. So the first wife was done by Reuben, the second was done by Shimon, which are perfectly good chalitzas. The third sister, who no matter if Reuben does it or if Shimon does it, either way, it's going to be a compromised chalitza. So there, either one could do it. So based on that, we have a machlokes. When you have a compromised chalitza, everybody agrees if there's a good chalitza and a compromised chalitza, of course, go for the good chalitza. But if you have two compromised chalitza, do you need each brother to do the chalitza? Or since both these chalitzas are equal, just have one of them do it. So Rav said earlier that when there's a compromised chalitza, each brother has to do it. Shmuel is saying if there's a compromised chalitza, since no one brother's chalitza is better than the others, it's enough to do one, right? That was the first shot in Shmuel. The second shot in Shmuel was The second pshat of Shmuel was is that when you say a compromised chalitza is not good, that's only if that chalitza has to pater a different woman. For instance, there's two women, two sisters are falling to Yibum, and there's two tzaras. You're going to do chalitza to each set of wives, but you have a choice of doing chalitza to wife A or wife B. So that means your chalitza is not only working for the woman that you did the chalitza on, it also has to work for her co-wife. Then you cannot compromise chalitzas. But since we're only making chalitza on one woman, it's a question of which brother should do it. Once again, it doesn't make a difference who does it. So that was the first Shmuel. The Shmuel that said that when there's three sisters married to three brothers, how do you deal with the third chalitza? But there was another Shmuel that we introduced. The Shmuel who said you're supposed to be chalitz the sisters. I'm sorry, you should not make chalitza on the sisters. Rather, you should make chalitza on the tzaras. So the Gemara once again had two pshatim in Shmuel. The first pshat was based on the shita of Ein Zika, and it was very watered down. And we said all Shmuel meant was if in the first set, so there's two sets of wives. And in the two sets of wives, so we'll call it set one and set two. In set one and set two, there's two sisters, right? So there's two sisters that are married to brothers, but each of these two brothers have other wives. So Shmuel said, if the first set of chalitza, you do it on the sister, on one of the two sisters, that's going to automatically compromise the chalitza on either of the two of the second set. So therefore, Zok Shmuel, on the first set, focus on making the chalitza on the outsider, not on the sister. But what Shmuel was saying is, if you ended up making chalitza on one of the sisters, so then on the second set, you have the second sister and her other wife, you have to make chalitza on both those wives. Why? Because since it's an inferior chalitza, you have to make both chalitzas. So this actually is a departure from what we said earlier, where Shmuel said that if you have two inferior chalitzas, it doesn't make a difference which brother does it. They're both inferior. Now Tosha is saying, now the Gemara is saying in Shmuel that if you have two inferior chalitzas, you have to do both of them. You can't do one and have it work for the other. And then there was a last chapter of Ashi, who goes back to what we said originally, is that even though you have two inferior chalitzas, only one chalitza is necessary. The only time you pick and choose to make chalitza on one woman over the other woman is if the chalitza on one woman will be a better chalitza. But if there's two equal chalitzas, even though they're inferior, you're allowed to pick any one you want. They don't let you do both. So that's what we learned yesterday in how Shmuel works. And then the Gemara decided that I wanted to learn about inferior chalitzas. Are all inferior chalitzas created equal? So we were talking about having an inferiority complex, because the whole day we were discussing inferior chalitzas. So a balas haget is considered a woman who got a get is pushed away. You cannot do yibum on her. And a balas maimer is someone who's not so posh that chalitza works, and therefore there are two inferior chalitzas. The Gemara wanted to know which one was better, which one was worse. The Gemara ended up coming out that you see from Rabbi Gamliel that they're exactly alike in how inferior they are. And since they're both equal, Rashi tells us that the psak halacha was that either one you do chalitza on is okay. And once again, we just discussed how there are two different ways of understanding Shmuel. When you have two inferior chalitzas, does that mean both have to do them, or that means either one is good? The Gemara here concludes, according to that shita, where since they're both alike, either one is good. And then we got into another shaila, which is what we're picking up now. So let's go to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, Meisa Shnia Mutar B'Rishoina. So we'll go back to the beginning of the whole thing. Amarav Huna Amarav. Beza Chayes Yevamos Shenaflu L'fnei Yavam Echad. There are two sisters who fell to Yibum to one man. So Chalutz L'Rishoina, if you made chalitza on the first of the two wives, Hutra, Chalutz L'Shni Hutra, that we know. You make chalitza on both sisters. But the question is, what happens if the first one died? So if the first one died, then she's out of the picture. Can you do yibum on the second one? So Rabbi Yochanan holds that the first one dies, you can do yibum on the second one. We had the second shita, So that was Rav Huna Marav. Rabbi Yochanan said, if the first one dies, you cannot do Yibim on the second one. So let's hone in on that case, because that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So let's say there's three brothers, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. And Shimon and Levi are married to two sisters. And first Shimon dies, and Shimon's wife falls to Reuben for Yibum. Now, when she falls to Reuben for Yibum, she's the only one who's falling to Reuben for Yibum, so she's 100% allowed to do Yibum with Reuben, right? Now, what happened is before Reuben has a chance to do Yibum on Shimon's almana, Levi dies. Now that Levi dies, it causes a great complication, because now Shimon's almana is a sister to Levi's almana, which means Reuben cannot do Yibum on either one. If later on Shimon's almana dies, so now if later on Levi's almana died, so now Shimon's almana goes back to her original position, which she was the only one who fell Yibum. Right? So first, Shimon's almana was the only one who fell Yibum. Then she was joined by Levi's almana, and then Levi's almana died, so she's back where she started from. So there, Rabbi Yochanan says, Kivan Shahutra, since when she first fell to Yibum, she had no sister who fell to Yibum, so Reuben was allowed to make Yibum. Only after she fell to Yibum, something occurred, and that means Levi died, and now there's another sister who's joining her into the Nefilas Yibum, which causes a problem. Now Reuben can't make Yibum on both of them. If Levi's almana dies later, and now Shimon's almana is once again the only one, then you're allowed to do Yibum. Then Reuben's allowed to do Yibum. So the wording is Kimin Shal Hutra, since it was originally mutter, the Nesra, and it became Aser, Hutra, if it became mutter again, it reverts back to its original position. On the other hand, Levi's almana, the moment she fell to Yibum, she was already Aser, because Shimon's almana was already following Yibum. So Levi's almana started off with Isser. Even if we remove that Isser later, for instance, Shimon's almana dies, she remains Aser, because when she first fell to Yibum, she was Aser, and therefore she remains Aser. That is the halacha that at least with the beginning of the Gemara about today is about that halacha. That's right. If the woman who fell to Yibum was originally mutter and then she became Aser, if the Isser falls off, she goes back to her original status of mutter Yibum. But if when she fell Yibum, she was never mutter, then she will stay Aser. Well, one of the svara is very simple. Is because Vibalt, there was no mitzvah Yibum at the time she fell, so now the Isher Eshazach remains.
We have many things that were first Aser and then they're mutter throughout.
But not Eshazach. Here we have the moment there's no Hector Yibum, so now there's an Isher Eshazach upon him. That's the problem. Is there's the underlying Isher Eshazach. So if there's no Yibum, it reverts back to the default of Isher Eshazach. Okay, so the Gemara had a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan from our Mishnah. So let's quickly learn the kasha and then we'll get started. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Esvei, Rabbi Yochanan. Our Mishnah had four brothers: Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. And Beis men Nesuin Beis Achayos. So let's say Levi and Yehuda were married to sisters. Umesu Hanesunis Achayos. Rachman Lastan Levi and Yehuda died. Now these two sisters fall to Yibum to Reuben and Shimon. So what does our Mishnah say? They can't do Yibum, they could only do Chalitza. Correct the Gemara, Vamai, let one of the brothers, Reuben or Shimon, and Lachlet Lolishmiya, let them make Chalitza on Yehuda's wife, Yehuda's almana, who was the second one to follow Yibum. And that means Levi's almana, Lagabe Shimon, will be ki Yevamos shahutra, a Yevama who, when she first fell to Yibum, she was the only sister. So therefore, she was mutter to Yibum on. Venesra, once Yehuda died and his almana joined the phrase of Shemer Shavim, and now there's two sisters who fell to Yibum, so Venesra became Aser, and now that Yehuda's almana dies as well, so that makes Levi's almana mutter again, and therefore taxor l'teira rishon. So here we're not suggesting that we should kill Yehuda's almana, but give her chalitza. Once we give her chalitza, she's completely out of the picture. And if she's completely out of the picture, let Shimon do Yibum on Levi Zalman. It's a very strong kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. So what did Rabbi Yochanan answer? Is our Mishnah. I don't know who's the Tana, but it's not reliable, and I don't have to pass him like that. So basically, he's discounting our Mishnah. So now the Gemara is going to go through.
I mean, is that a precedent or what?
Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir?
He said, "Kloimer zu ein Mishnah." He's saying that this is not a Mishnah. It's not accurate. It was misquoted. You asked me if that ever happened in Shas. I can tell you it didn't happen in the last 24 hours.
1 minute. Anyone could say that. This is not a Mishnah. I don't recognize it. Doesn't it have a special authority, these Mishnahs?
Well, the Gemara shares your concern, because the Gemara spends the next half a Amud asking, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan answer in an alternative fashion? There are so many ways we could have explained the Mishnah where it wouldn't have contradicted his halacha. So why did he just so easily dismiss our Mishnah? So vice the from the Gemara that it's something that's not comfortable, that they're not comfortable with, because the Gemara is looking for every which way to try to validate the Mishnah. So the Gemara asks, why did Rabbi Yochanan have to say that I'm not consistent with the Mishnah? We could have easily explained the Mishnah to say that it stems with Rabbi Yochanan. The Leimelei, this is what Rabbi Yochanan could have said. My choltos nami vikatani, when our Mishnah says choltos v'lovis yavmois, it doesn't mean that you have to make chalitza on both of them. It just means you have to make chalitza on the second woman who fell yibum, which is exactly what we're suggesting is the halacha according to Rabbi Yochanan. So ma choltos nami vikatani, chaylet says chada. It means one of them has to do chalitza. If you do chalitza on the second almana, then the first almana you can do yibum on. In fact, it's a very, very nice approach. The problem is that's not what the Mishnah says. Chayil tzois katani. It's plural. Both these women in question need chalitza. In fact, I have a way out of that too. The leimelei, my chayil tzois to alma. It doesn't mean both the women in this example of the Mishnah need chalitza. It means the second almana, no matter how many times this case might reoccur in life, those women, meaning the second women, the woman who fell to Yibum a second, they're the women who are highlights. Nice try. But if you look at the words of the Mishnah, it says Harei Elu Chayil. These two women, the first woman who fell to Yibum and the second woman who fell to Yibum, these two women are Chayil. Right to Gemara, yes, that is true. That if you made chalitza already on the first almana, you make chalitza on the second almana. Because, like we said, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's only the first almana that you have the option of doing yibum. On the second almana, you for sure have to make chalitza. So maybe the case of the Mishnah is v'lema the chalutz l'rishayna b'reisha. Maybe the reason why our Mishnah says harei elu chalutz l'mis yavmos is because the Mishnah is speaking in a case where by the time they came to Beis Din to ask what to do, someone had already made chalitza on the first almana. The big doich is still right. But it's still better than saying Achayosh Eini Yodei Mishanan. So that's not either an option. Because Chayil Tzois, if you look at the Lashon HaMishnah, it says Chayil Tzois. That clearly seems to be mashma that this is your only option. Frank to Gemara, the Leimelei, why don't you have another option? The Leimelei, the reason why they both need chalitza, even though technically, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you could have made yibum on the first sister who fell yibum after you do chalitza on the second sister, but the reason why the Mishnah didn't allow it is because of Gzeira. The leimelei Gzeira dilma kadim v'chalutz l'rishoyin liberation. Maybe the reason why we make both these sisters get chalitza, even though technically you could do chalitza on the second woman who fell yibum and then do yibum on the first sister, we don't allow it because we're afraid that people will mix up and they'll think it doesn't matter which one. As long as you do chalitza on one, you can do yibum on the other. And we might end up doing yibum on the second one, which is usher, because when she fell to yibum, she was in a massive isser. So maybe that's the svar. So that doesn't make sense that it's a gzeira. Because it says, V'loi miyabmois katani, which is very definitive. Meaning, Zok Rashi, the inami chalotz l'shniya in kaim yibum. But loy mishabes means neither woman is allowed to make yibum on, period. So therefore you cannot answer that way. The leka din yibum hacha klal. In fact, the Gemara doesn't give up so fast. The Gemara is looking for every which way. That's right. The Gemara is bothered by Achayus and Yidei Mishanan, and the Gemara is trying to find any which way to make the Mishnah stem with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Vayisrael had a lot of clout. The Mishnah we wanted the Mishnah to him. In fact, the Gemara v'lei malei gzeir Shem Yevamos. Maybe the reason why you don't let him make yibum on the first one is because then maybe the second brother will die. V'aser levatel mitzvahs yivamim. But this is even more because so to make chalitza first and then make yibum, right? So Rashi explains. It's not because of Zika that the Tana of our Mishnah is saying that you cannot make yibum on both sisters. The sphere ain't Zika. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan will determine that our Mishnah holds ain't Zika. The time Mishum Zika, if it was because of Zika, then mechichalut l'shniya upaka zikasa. Once you made chalitza on Yehuda's almana, shari liyibum rishayna. You should be able to do yibum on Levi's almana. Kedarmi, like we said. Kedarmi no. Ella taima. The reason why in our Mishnah it's chalitz v'levis yamos is mishum shema yamos. Maybe after he does yibum on one of the women, the other brother is going to die, and there's no one to do yibum or chalitza on the second sister. Like we said at the beginning of the parak, that's how the people who learn Ein Zikah explain our Mishnah. Now it's going to answer Shlomi's question, but here we're suggesting to make chalitza first, not yibum. They said, you know what? No yibum at all. Even if you make chalitza on the second sister first, we still will not allow yibum on the first sister. Even if there's chalitza already done, so there's no gzeira that will be mevatel mitzvah yamin. Why don't we allow it? We don't want ever yibum to occur by a chayos because something might go wrong. Because once we allow you to do yibum on one of these women, we're afraid that you'll do the yibum before you do chalitza on the second woman. And then, and when Reuben does yibum on one woman, Shimon might die, and then there's no one to do yibum or chalitza on Yehuda's alman. Therefore, we say no yibum at all. But in Rabbi Yochanan's case, there was no such gzeira that another brother might die. Because what was Rabbi Yochanan's case? His case was that there were one of the women died, right? In his case, one of the women died, so there's no problem of fulfilling the din yibum on her because she died. Now the question is, could you make yibum on the other one? Rabbi Yochanan would not learn pshat in the Mishnah that way. You know why? Rabbi Yochanan l'misha lechayish. Rabbi Yochanan holds that we're not choshish from Misa, and therefore it would be impossible for him to understand the Mishnah that way. But the Gemara doesn't give up. We have another way. So you can see the Gemara is trying to avoid it at all costs, writing off a Mishnah. V'lei malei, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan learn pshat in the Mishnah that it's going according to Rabbi Eliezer? Who is Rabbi Eliezer? We're going to learn his shita a little bit later on in the Gemara, in the Masechta, not today. He says the Amar Kivan Sha'amdalov Sha'achas Be'isr Nesra Lav Eilamus. If a woman who's falling to evil, if at any point she becomes usher to him, we're saying here that if she first was usher when she first fell, it's a problem. Rabbi Eliezer is even more chomer. Rabbi Eliezer holds if at any point during her even if at the beginning she was mutter, but some isser showed up later, even if that isser is removed later, she remains usher forever. So maybe it's going to go to Rabbi Eliezer, and that's why it's chayletzes v'loy misyabois. Zok to Gemara that you couldn't say that either, because let's go look back at our Mishnah. Let's go look back at the first Mishnah of our parak. The first Mishnah of our parak brings down the case of chayletzes v'loy misyabois, and afterwards it says Rabbi Eliezer Emer Misham Emer. So doesn't that prove clearly that Rabbi Eliezer is only introduced into the Mishnah after it says chayletzes v'loy misyabois, which means the first part of our Mishnah clearly was not Rabbi Eliezer speaking. Zok to Gemara, you cannot say that because We just Sefer Rabbi Eliezer, Sefer Lav Rabbi Eliezer. But the Gemara is not giving up. So the Gemara, maybe we have another option. The name of Lahu, the Nafal B'Vasachas. All of the way we're learning, it's speaking where first Levi died, and then Yehuda died. What if they died at precisely the exact moment? Then neither one was mutter. When they each fell, they were both usher at the time. So that stems with Rabbi Yochanan, and there Rabbi Yochanan holds you could never make even. Rabbi Yosy Glili, the Amar Efshel Tzamtim. Rabbi Yosy Glili was the Shita who held that it's possible for two things to occur at precisely the exact same moment. Zok Gemara Loisasam Lon Tanak Rabbi Yosy Glili. We're not going to say that our Stam Mishnah follows the Shita of Rabbi Yosy Glili when we don't really pass like it. But the Gemara is not giving up. V'lei Malay. V'lei Malay maybe say the Lo Yadin Hainafel Bereisha. Sure, they didn't die at the same time. Levi and Yehuda did not die at the same time, but they died close enough to each other that nobody knows. We don't know who died first and died second. Zok to Gemara, it's impossible to say that. I'm sorry?
Happens a lot of accidents.
That's right. You can't know exactly at which moment they died. That's right. So Zok to Gemara, Ihachi, if that was the case, it wouldn't make sense in the Mishnah. Because what does our Mishnah say? Our Mishnah says that they're not allowed to both do Yibum. And if they both did do Yibum, then they both have to divorce their wives. Correct the Gemara, if we don't know, if it's a suffix here, we don't know who died first and who died second, there's no justification to force Reuben and Shimon, who did Yibum on Levi and Yehuda's Almanas, there's no justification to force them both to divorce. Bishlama Rishon, I understand the first person who does Yibum, we force him to divorce. You know why? Amrina lei man sharilach. You had no right to do Yibum, and when you did Yibum, she was an achois zikukasoi, because there was another sister who felt Yibum to you. But after you made Yibum, the second guy who made Yibum, there was no longer an achois zikukasoi, because the first sister already did Yibum with the other brother. So the second brother who came into the picture, at that point, Elishniya, Amar, he could say, don't force me to divorce my wife. And I'll tell you why you shouldn't force me to divorce my wife. Because, first of all, which wife am I allowed to remain married to? The first Amana. Because the first Amana, when she fell beheaded. It's only the second Amana who you cannot remain married to. So let the second brother say, I married her beheaded, because he already did Yibum illegally on one wife. So there was no Ma'achash B'Kosa. The question is, maybe this is the second Amana, not the first Amana? Maybe not. Maybe not. My brother who did Yibum first, he wasn't allowed to do the Yibum, you're telling him to divorce her. He was the one who did Yibum to the second one. She was always also from the moment she fell in Yibum. The one that I was Miyabim, maybe it's the first sister, and therefore how could you force me to divorce my wife? The second sister, he would have to divorce her because she didn't have a heter Yibum, because when she fell in Yibum, she was instantly usher. Rabbi Yochanan's only matter, someone who was first mutter, then she became usher, and then she became mutter again. So let the second person who even claim that's my wife. So therefore, since we tried every which way to try to make the Mishnah stem with Rabbi Yochanan, unsuccessfully, Hainu the Ka'amalei Achayois Enidem Yishanon. So you see from the Gemara that the Gemara Mama shares the concern that David Zolti asked. You see, we tried every which possible way, and there's mamish no answer, so we have no choice other than to say that maybe the Mishnah is not accurate. Okay, Zok to Gemara. Now we're going to start getting into the more difficult Gemaras.
Is there a precedent? Is there a precedent for that?
All I can answer is not in the last 24 hours. But we do have many times that the Gemara asks from a brisa, and the Gemara says that it's not reliable. We've had it.
It doesn't say.
No, we had just recently a case where they quoted a brisa to ask a kasha from, but before they even got to the kasha, there was a kasha on the brisa, and the Gemara had to edit the brisa in order to answer the kasha, and then to ask the kasha, and then the person who the kasha was asked on said, "You're asking me a kasha from a brisa, you have to edit? If you can edit it once, I'll edit it twice."
Yeah, but they didn't say that there was no such thing.
What's the difference? It's either
because if something came in that we got to deal with it, right? If there's a mission, we got to deal with it. But
so maybe it's a shita of a yochid, and we don't pass go like.
But somehow this exact word.
Yeah, okay, so let's think about it. It's not. Hoysa achas mehen asura ala echad israel. Asur ba umuter bachos. So this could get overwhelmingly complicated if we think into it too much. So let's not think into it too much. let's just focus on the basics of the case. There were 4 brothers. 2 of them were married to sisters. So in our case, Reuben and Shimon were single, and Levi and Yehuda were married to sisters, and Levi dies, and Yehuda died, and these 2 sisters fall to Yibum to Reuben and Shimon. And we said, what happens if one of these 2 sisters was usher to Reuben? For instance, it's Reuben's daughter, or it's Reuben's mother-in-law, right? There are 15 cases of a rayas in the first Mishnah that it could work out. But if we start cheshbing them, the springs are going to pop out of our head. So we'll just stick to the basics.
Do we not have a common claim? Madach Ashes Ach is mutter, all the other stuff should be mutter as well. Like, how come we never dealt with
Why should they be such a kol chomer?
Ashes Ach is so clever.
But they're all chomer. All their rice have chomer with chi, of course.
This is the- this
Or
is
it
one
says
over the other.
specifically over here.
And that was the first half of the Masechta.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's focus on this. So we have over here, we have 4 brothers and 2 brothers that were married to sisters, Levi and Yehuda, that were married to sisters, they died. And now you have 2 sisters that are following even to Reuben and Shimon. We say, however, if one of these 2 sisters was usher on Reuven because it's his daughter, his mother-in-law, his grandmother-in-law, anyone that have 15 arise, it's kalosoi, whatever what it is. So then, come to Reuven, 2 sisters didn't fall to Yibum to Reuven. Only 1 sister fell to Reuven to Yibum. And therefore, Reuven could do Yibum on the only 1 sister that fell to him. Because he doesn't have a problem of a chosh kukasa. So that's what it says. Hoysa achas mehen asura ala echad isur erva. If one of these 2 sisters was usher to Reuven with a chi of chorus, so then asur ba umuter ba chosa. He's allowed to do Yibum on the other one because he does not have a problem of a chosh kukasa because only one of these 2 sisters fell to him to Yibum. But his brother Shimon, who is not related to either one of those 2 sisters, also b'shtein, he has the problem of a chosh kukasa. Sol Kadai, you can already see where this is headed. Sol Kadaita, I would have thought. So what happened? The example of we were saying one of these 2 women, one of these 2 sisters was usher to Reuven, right? So the Gemara is using the example of Chamoisai as the woman. And the Rishonim discuss out of the 15 different reasons why Reuven couldn't marry one of the sisters, why did it pick Chamoisai, right? So one of the Shatim offered the Rishonim is because that's one of the easiest and simplest cases, and I'm still not going to get into the mechanics of it because we're not going to finish the daf. But whatever it is, one of these 2 women was Reuven's Chamoisai. So the question here is, who fell to Yibum first? Did the sister that was also to Reuven fall to Yibum first, or did the other sister fall first? Why would it make a difference? Let's see. At this point, we're going to assume the nafla Chamoisai tchila. When Levi died, Levi's wife was the mother-in-law of Reuven. So when Levi died, Reuven was never mechuyev in any Yibum at all, right? Frank the Gemara, Bamai. Let's say Leiku Chasan. So let's just prioritize the case. So first Levi died. His almana, Reuven doesn't have to do Yibum at all because there's no chi of Yibum there because she's his mother-in-law. Then Yehuda dies, and if Yehuda dies, there's no reason why Reuven cannot do Yibum on Yehuda's wife. It's a girl that has no shaykhs to him, right? And her sister never fell Yibum because her sister was his mother-in-law. Correct the Gemara. That means his mother-in-law will technically become his sister-in-law, right? Changes the relationship a little bit, right? So Zok the Gemara v'amai, the leiku chasen liyabim chad, the eina chamoisai, bereisha. Let's let the other one do Yibum on the one who's not chamoisai bereisha. So let Reuven do Yibum on the woman who's not his mother-in-law, right? Because Reuven will do Yibum on the second woman first. But have a chamoisai like abeidach, and now Levi's almana for Shimon will be ki Yevamos hahotra v'nesra because of hotra. Because when Levi first died, there was only 1 sister who fell Yibum, and she only fell to Yibum to Shimon, not to Reuven, because she was Reuven's mother-in-law. So when the second sister dies, sure, now the first sister becomes awesome. But Reuven could do Yibum on the second sister because Reuven didn't have the problem of the chosh kukasai because the first sister was his mother-in-law. Now, from Shimon's perspective, this woman was originally mutter when she fell to Yibum because she was the only one who fell to Yibum. Then she became usher because her sister felt the Yibum. But then her sister was Nisyabim with Reuben. So now she's mutter again. So why can't Shimon now do Yibum on the second sister? Amar Papa, because going enough lahachta ain't a chamoisha reisha. That's not what happened. First, the other sister fell, and therefore, the chamoisha, when she fell to Ibum, she was right away also. Finished. Simple. Rabbi Lazar Omer Beishamai Omer. So Rabbi Lazar, if we go back to the Mishnah, this is going to be a very, very easy shtickle Gemara. This next shtickle, Rabbi Lazar says Beishamai Omer Mikayib Ubetzilam Yitziyah. Beishamai holds that if these two sisters fell to Ibum and illegally, these two brothers, Reuben and Shimon, made Ibum, they keep them. And Basil holds not. Okay, this is a nice little oasis. We have 4 lines of very easy Gemara. Tanya Rabbi Lazar Omer. Rabbi Lazar said, Beishamai Omer Yakaimu Ubesil Omer Yoitziyu. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says no, Yakaimu. Rabbi Shimon holds that no, you keep them. Now, I'm not sure what Rabbi Shimon says. The Gemara is going to analyze what Rabbi Shimon means when he says Yukaimu. Does he mean to say that Basil says Yukaimu? Does he mean to say Beishamai says Yukaimu? Abashal Omer, Kal Hoya Lahem LeBasil B'Davar. Abashal says that Basil was the Makel in this case. So clearly, Abashal is saying that it's Basil who said Yukaimu, not Yotziyu. Right? So Beishamai Abim Yotziyu, it's Beishamai who said Yotziyu, but Basil Abim Yukaimu. So clearly, Abashal is arguing on Rabbi Lezer's presentation of the machlokes between Beishamai and Basil. Rabbi Shimon, come on. Rabbi Shimon didn't talk about anybody specifically. Rabbi Shimon just said Yekaimu. So who is he talking about? Ike Beishamai. If he's trying to say that Beishamai holds Yekaimu, Hainu Rabbi Lezer. That's what Rabbi Lezer said. So why is Abashal? I'm sorry. Why is Rabbi Shimon repeating that? Ike Beisil. And if he wants to say Yekaimu means Beisil, well then Hainu Abashal. So exactly what is Rabbi Shimon saying? So all Rabbi Shimon is saying is Hachik Omar leNechligu Beishamai Basil B'Davar. All he's saying is there's no machlokes. Everybody agrees Yekaimu. Simple Gemara. Okay, back to work. Ha'isa achas mahen. Ha'isa achas mahen. So the Gemara says if one of them was usher to one, and if the other one was usher to the other, then each one could do chalit or ibum on the only sister that fell to him to ibum. We already learned this halacha. We learned it in an earlier Mishnah. Earlier in an earlier Mishnah on Daf Chav, the Mishnah already says achaisa kishehi yevemta oy chilatzes oy mishevemes. So if the Mishnah already said it in Daf Chav, why does the Mishnah here on Daf Chavav have to repeat the same thing? We need it. Why? The Yashmin Hasam, in the case on Daf Chav, there was only one brother there. There was one brother, and there was an Isra. Let's actually look at the Mishnah, so we'll see what the case is. In our Mishnah, we're talking about 2 brothers, right? There's 2 brothers. One is going to be us, the other one's not going to be us. But on Daf Chav, it just speaks about one brother only. Klal Amar Yevamos. If it's in Isra Erva, it's like Chaletz of Shabemes, and it says over there. Oh, where does it say This means if there's 2 sisters who fall to only one brother Yibum, and one of those 2 sisters is an Isra Erva, so he does Yibum on the other one. So if it says it over here by one, why does it say it in our Mishnah again when there's 2 brothers? So tomorrow, because there's a big chiddush. Zok to Gemara, I'll tell you what the chiddush is.
You can always answer now that because of the Yosy, we got to repeat it.
Why?
Because you might say that there's no such thing. You repeat it again.
Zok to Tzricha. Zok to Tzricha. The Iyashmi in Hasam, if the Mishnah only told us that when there's one brother who's allowed to do even on one sister because the other sister is erba, there it's mutter. We don't have a concern that if he does yibum on one, his other brother might illegally do yibum on the other one because there is no other brother in that Mishnah. Aval halcha, where only one brother was allowed to do yibum on one, while the other brother couldn't do yibum on either one. We're afraid if we're letting Reuven do yibum on one of the sisters, maybe Shimon will also do yibum on the other sister, and that wouldn't be allowed. Emaloi. Maybe you wouldn't. That's why our Mishnah has to say it. Frank Gemara, okay, so let it say it in our Mishnah and skip it in the previous Mishnah. V'yashmin hacha, it's because we show the ikasheni the kamuchach. Fakert, here it's better because you have one brother who's doing yibum. Someone might think that a chaysi says mutter. No, you see the other brother didn't do yibum at all. So he's there to show side by side that a chayshish is usher. Aval hasam the lekasheni. There is no other brother. So therefore, if we let him do even on one, people might think that there's never a problem of a chayshisha by yibam, emaloi tricha. So that's why we need both cases. Isser mitzvah. Now we have a new halacha. What if one of the sisters was only usher to him not with a chi of paris, but it was usher to him with a chi of lav or a isser drabban? That's also on Daf Chof. It discusses that if one of these sisters are usher to you with drabbanon or with a lav, it's chayletzes v'loy misyabems. So why does our Mishnah need to repeat the same halacha all over again? Yisur misr v'yisur kedusha chayletzes v'loy misyabems. Zok Gemara, it's very simple. Because Hasam Isser Mitzvah L'chudah. There, it wasn't speaking, that Mishnah wasn't speaking about a sister. That Mishnah was Tamazai saying, if a Yevamos falls to you and there's an Isser Lav, do Chalitza, don't say Yibam. Here, there's an Achais involved, right? One of these sisters is usher to you with an Isser Mitzvah. Hacha Isser Mitzvah Vechais. So Sol Kadai Techamina. I would have thought, Leikum Isser Mitzvah, the Mokum Isser Erba, with this Yabam. Maybe since this is all midrabanan anyway, maybe the Rabbanan will say that we'll allow this Isser to be strong enough to outlaw one of his sisters, because then at least you could salvage the Yibam and the other sister, right? So there's a reason why they should be more chomer and say this Asher's Chalitza and Yibam together, because it'll actually be matter the other one to Yibam. Kamash Lon, correct him up, but why not? Why don't they do that? This is all the Rabbanans. Let him say it's completely usher to do one sister, and therefore he could do even another sister. Since midaraisa there's a chiyuv yibum on both sisters, because one sister was only usher midarabanan, so midaraisa kapaga ba'achos kukasa. Gemara. So I would have thought we show mitzvah of the Rabbanan. Maybe the Rabbanan would still ask her in order so that you could do even another sister. Kamash Malon that they don't do that.
Why not?
It's because Kiva Midaraisa Ramya Kame. Since Midaraisa, if you took all the Rabbanans away, these two sisters would be also on each other, even though the Zikut is only Rabban. Yeah. Not here. Because that's my writer. How is the Achas man? Correct tomorrow once again. If one of them was also to one of the brothers, so then he could do even with other brothers. So the Mishnah says this. The first Mishnah says, if one of these sisters was also to one of the brothers. Then the Mishnah says, what if each of these sisters was also to one of the brothers? So then one could do Yibam on the other sister, and the other one could do Yibam on the other sister. So it's really the same thing repeating itself. Once the Mishnah tells us this halacha, that if one of the two brothers is also to one of the sisters, he could do Yibam on the other sister, so I could figure out on my own. I don't need the Mishnah to add that layer of complication. I can figure it out on my own to say that if the other brother was also one sister, it's the same thing. So why don't you the Mishnah tell me that? What's the difference if this situation was with one brother or if this situation repeated itself with both brothers? The Yashmin Hasam, if we only knew when one brother was usher to one that's mutter, that's because Mishum Dik Asheni Demuchach. Because the other brother in the same scenario is not doing Yibam or Chalitza on the other sister, so it'll still advertise for us that Achos Kukasa is usher. It highlights it, right? But if there is no second brother, and if it only said the first case, not the second case, if anything, it's a great echacha, because since one brother could only do Yibam on one sister, and the other brother could only do Yibam on the other sister, it illustrates very clearly when it's mutter, when it's usher. So that's why the Mishnah wanted to express both cases. It's this case that they said, right? It's a Zui Sha'amru. When we look back at the Mishnah says over here, Zui Sha'amru Achaisha. This is what the Mishnah meant earlier when it said Achaisha Chalutza. Correct the Gemara, Zuhi Lamute Mai. Whenever the Mishnah Zuhi, it's obviously saying this is the case, but not others. So in which case does this plan not work? The plan is if one of the sisters is usher anyway, machmas erva, you could do Yibam on the other sister. Where it does not work? But when the utim is mitzvah, it's being a minor case of it's a mitzvah lazeh, it's a mitzvah lazeh. if the Isurim were not a Chayv Krisos, it was only a Lav or a Derabanan, in such a case, you wouldn't say this rule, and therefore they both would still have to make Chalitza, not Yibam. Frank Gemara, Hasu Lamali, Hainuach. We've already learned this halacha that if it's a Derabanan that doesn't stop the Yibam when you make Chalitza. Mali Lechad, Mali Letrei. What's the difference if this repeats itself with two people, or if the Mishnah only expressed it when there was one person? So it's Mamal de Tema, Ki lo yamrinon uki iser mitzvah b'mokim iser erva. When do we not say that the iser mitzvah should completely disqualify the yibum of one of the sisters, so that he should be able to do yibum on the other sister? Is heicha di ikal migzer mishum sheni. When there's another brother around who might also do yibum when he's not supposed to. But if there's only one brother around and there's no gzeir that the other brother might do yibum, ema lahai ukimna iser mitzvah b'makom iser erva, ulahai ukimna iser mitzvah b'makom iser erva. Let's say for each brother we should put mitzvah b'makom and cancel uliyaboy and let them both do yibum. But tomorrow kamash malon that we don't do that. Amar b'damarav the chein tani rabchia. Now, this is a repeat now of the very complicated Gemara we had on Yutes Amud Beis that says all of the 15 arayos mentioned in the first Mishnah, all of those 15 arayos, it's possible that one of them will be Asher to Ruvain, the two sisters, the among us of Levi and Yehuda fell to Reuben and Shimon. So we said that if one of these sisters is Asher to Reuben and the other sister is Asher to Shimon, they can each do Yibam on the opposite sisters. So Rabbi said all 15 cases of our Erev and our Mishnah would be able to fit in to this case where one of them could be Reuben's daughter, and one of them could be Shimon's daughter, one of them could be Reuben's mother-in-law, one of them could be Shimon's mother-in-law, one of them could be Reuben's daughter-in-law, the other one could be Shimon's daughter-in-law. If you figure it out and you want to spend time on that Rashi, it works out. So the Chein Tani Reb Chia, the Chulon Ani Kair Behen, Tasur Lazeh, Mutaris Lazeh. Now, if you remember, this was first introduced to us back then when we were discussing whether or not our Mishnah would ever include something that was involved in a machlokes. Remember, we had that sugya where Levi wanted to add a 16th erva, and Rabbi scremped him, and Rav scremped him and says, he had a very stark haloshin. I think he said something very right. And the Gemara said is that it's because you want to introduce into our Mishnah something that will be a subject of a machlokes. So therefore, Reb Chia said, all 15 of these arise, and Rabbi Yehuda said, no, not all 15 cases would fit, only Mechamoise ve'elach, which are 9 cases. The 6 first cases, which we're talking about children, those cases are omitted from a possibility of it occurring where Reuben has one Isser and Shimon has the same Isser on the other sister. Why? Because how would Bitoy work out? This we have to calculate. How would Bitoy work out? If we want to have a case where Levi and Yehuda, yeah, that's right. But the problem is Bitoy doesn't work. Why doesn't Bitoy work? Let's think about it. If Shimon and Levi, if Levi and Yehuda are married to sisters, right? So let's call these two girls Rachel and Leah. We need to say that Rachel is Reuben's daughter and Leah is Shimon's daughter, right? So how could it possibly have happened? So the only way that it would have happened is if Reuben raped a woman and they gave birth to Rachel, Shimon raped that same woman and she gave birth to Leah, right? So when this rape victim was looking for a shidduch for her daughter, she said, who would be more passionate than the brothers of my rapist, right? So then she married off her 2 daughters who are the children of a rape from Reuben and Shimon. So now you have a case where there's 2 sisters that are also, one's the daughter of Reuben, one's the daughter of Shimon. But that case only happens when you're dealing with an X-rated case, so to speak. Because if Leah was Reuben's daughter because Reuben was married to the mother, well then Shimon couldn't have married that mother, right? And even if Shimon would have married that mother illegally, right? Reuben couldn't do even on Shimon's daughter because it's also his wife's daughter. So the case simply wouldn't work out. So the case of Bitoy does not work out in a conventional case where the children were born with a marriage. The case would only work out in a gray area case, in the case that was through an Einitzin. And Reb Chia wants to keep our Mishnah clean. He doesn't want our Mishnah, I'm sorry, not Reb Chia, Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda says, I don't want the Mishnah to be discussing cases that aren't nice. So my time, Kivan the Bitoi, I'm sorry? Oh, farfetched. Kivan the Bitoi be'Einzin, who the Mishkachas law, but the soon loy Mishkachas law, since that case wouldn't be able to occur other than with a case of Einzin, but the soon Kamari be'Einzin loy Kamari. The Gemara, the Mishnah wants to discuss conventional cases, not non-conventional cases. The Abaye Metargum, Abaye says no. I have no problem including that as one of the cases of our Mishnah. Even the Ashkucha Mishkachas law, since it could happen, although not in a classical case, Ibay B'Einzin to have it, we will count it. Ibay B'Nesuin to have it. The cases that work out with Nesuin, fine, but the cases that only work out with Einzin will include those as well. Avol, but Abai said, even I have my red lines. Avol Eishes Achim, Shlahay Balamay Loy. Eishes Achim, Shlahay Balamay, it's impossible for it to happen in both cases. Even the Libud Rab Shimon, who the Mishkachas, since this could only occur according to Rab Shimon, a case where there's two sisters, and one is usher to one brother, one's usher to Reuben, else Eishes Achim, Shlahay Balamay. And the other sister is only usher to Shimon, else Eishes Achim, Shlahay Balamay. So therefore, I'll leave it around Lamishkachas law, the plukta like Kamari. That's how it was relevant back then. I don't want to list a case that would only fit in according to Reb Shimon, but not according to Rabbanan. And we're going to get into the details of that case shortly. Reb Safar Metargim, Reb Safar says no. And now we're going to go through how it works, but it's going to only work out according to Reb Shimon and not according to Rabbanan. Now, if you remember, Reb Shimon's chiddush was, when do you say Eishes Acham Shlahaya Bailam is a problem? That's only if this third brother was born before this woman was settled, before this woman had Chalitza or Yibum made to her. So when he was born, she felt into Yibum, but since he never was alive, when his brother was alive, he becomes usher to her, right? But what happens if by the time the third brother is born, so Reuben dies, and by the time Levi is born, first Reuben dies and Shimon does Yibum. And after Shimon did Yibum, only then was Levi born. So when Levi was born, this woman wasn't the Shemesh Yevim anymore. She was settled. So if Shimon would die later, Levi would be allowed to make Yibum, according to Reb Shimon only. According to Reb Shimon only. So Zog to Gemara, how could you have a case of Eishes Achim Shloya Beilamai, that one's usher to Reuben and one's usher to Shimon? You would need to have 6 brothers. There are 6 brothers. The case would be Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun. V'liba Reb Shimon. And the way the case works out is actually a siman for us to remember this very complicated case. And it's Meis Noilet Yibum. First someone died, then somebody was born, and then Yibum was done. And then this same scenario repeated itself again, Meis Noilet Yibum. And now the Gemara is going to explain the case. The Gemara is going to do here what Rashi did back there. Reuven v'Shimon Nesuin Shtei Achayos. Reuven and Shimon were married to 2 sisters. Levi v'Yehuda Nesuin Shtei Nachrias. And Levi and Yehuda were married, but they were married to 2 women who were not sisters. Meis Reuven. Reuven died. When Reuven died, his almana fell to Shimon, to Levi, and to Yehuda. Right? After he died, Noiled Yisachar. Another brother, a 5th brother, was born. Yisachar is now permanently usher to Reuben's almana, because he was born when Reuben died before any Yibum was up. So now Yisachar will be permanently usher to Reuben's almana. So who did Yibum? Levi did Yibum. The Yibum Levi, and Levi did Yibum on Reuben's wife. Later on, Meis Shimon. Shimon died. Shimon was married to the other sister, right? And what happened is after Shimon died, Noilet's Zvulun, which means Zvulun will never be able to marry Shimon's wife. So now we have a scenario where Yisachar could never marry Reuben's almana, and Zvulun could never marry Shimon's almana. But Yisachar could marry Shimon's almana, and Zvulun could marry Reuben's almana, right? How could Zvulun marry? Why could Zvulun marry Reuben's almana? Because even though Zvulun was born after Reuben died, but by the time Zvulun was born, Reuben's almana was already married to Levi, right? So you see how it only works according to Reb Shimon. Only according to Reb Shimon is Zvulun allowed to marry Reuben's almana, because Zvulun wasn't born until way after, until Reuben's almana was already remarried. So this only works according to Reb Shimon.
back and forth and then just tomorrow that once she's moving, the month she stays moving.
That's right. That's the Chachamim, right? And that's exactly about the Baal. So you see, this whole case is only possible if you follow the sheet of Reb Shimon and not the sheet of the Rabbanan, and that's why some people didn't want to include that in our Mishnah's case. So Zok to Gemara. So then Noel Zvulun v'Yivam Yehuda, and then Mesu Levi v'Yehuda b'Leibanim. Levi and Yehuda, who each had two wives, right? They had their own wives that were Nachriyos, and they also had these two sisters as wives. One was originally Reuben's almana, and one was originally Shimon's almana. But Naflu Kami Yisachar Uzavulu. And now these two sisters and their tzaris fell to Yibam, to Yisachar and Zavulun. So Asur Lazeh, Reuben's almana, who's Asur to Yisachar, Mutaris Lazeh, Zavulun could do Yibam on her. Asur Lazeh, and Shimon's almana, who Zavulun is Asur to, is Mutar to Yisachar, Mutaris Lazeh. So you have a perfect case, but it only works out according to Reb Shimon. Why did it have the case of a Chayza Shiyavemta? Lamali? I'm sorry, period. Lamali Yibem Yehuda. Why did you need to make this complicated case where after Shimon died, Yehuda did Yibam? Why didn't the case stop right there? Yibam Yehuda Nami Mishkachasla. Mishum Tzara. I'm sorry, Mishkachasla, period. What's the case? The case was that first Levi died, and because Levi died, first Reuben died, and because Reuben died, and Yisachar wasn't born yet, Yisachar becomes permanently usher to Reuben's almana, right? Later on, we said Shimon died, right? And when Shimon died, Zvulun was born after that. Now Zvulun's usher to Shimon's almana. So we can stop right there. Why did we need to develop the case further and have Yehuda do the Yibam? Even before Yehuda did the Yibam, we have a perfect case of two sisters that fell Yibam, because we could say Levi died, so Reuben's original almana is now in a matter of requiring Yibam. Shimon died, and Yehuda didn't do Yibam yet. If Shimon died, and the almana wasn't dealt with, so you have Shimon's almana, and you have Levi's almana, now fell to Yibam. So what's going to happen is Yisachar would be allowed to marry Shimon's almana, and Zvulun would be allowed to marry Levi's almana. Why do you need to develop the case further that she went and got married to Yehuda? It just makes it more complicated for us, because we have to make the case, and now here we have to reverse the case, which doubles our complication. So you know why it said such a complicated case? Mishum Tzara, because it also wants to say that it's usher to the Tzara. So Yehuda was the one who had another wife. So we wanted that Shimon's almana did Yibam to Yehuda, because not only is she usher to Zvulun, the Tzara, her Tzara, which is Yehuda's other wife, would also be usher to Zvulun. And the Mishnah says, Aisha Sarasayan, the Tzara Sarasayan. So we want to have a case where it can illustrate that as well.
This is Reuben is already a kaponis.
That's right. So vice versa, not going to the Rebbe. Vice versa, not going to. Yeah, that's a good point. So you found the case where you have even a case where this sister asked her Tzara, but Tzara the Tzara Ma'ikalamimar. It means Levi and Yehuda's other wives had to have gotten married elsewhere. That's no problem. You want complication? I'll give you complication. Going to Hadar, the Yibimnu, Nami God Vasher. Add another two boys to the mix, make son 7 and 8. Then there'll be, and God and Usher had other wives. So then they'll answer those stories. Okay, let's stop here.
What's this conversation? Yisachar and Zvulun also died?
Yisachar and Zvulun also, no, they didn't die. God and Usher died. God and Usher died.
What?
God and Usher died. Yeah. I'm happy we ended the Gemara with Yisachar and Zvulun, because today is the Nasi of Zvulun. Today, when they read the Slim, it's the Nasi of Zvulun. Zvulun is known to be wealthy, to become a clear. The Shina Baruch said today is a special day that's Mesugal to daven for Parnossa, because it's the Nasi of Zvulun. I'm going to add Pirush Rashi V'Toshis to what the Shina Baruch said. The reason why today is a school for Parnossa is because of Nasi of Zvulun. But Pasach has every day.